Thanks for clicking! Canada could be seeing higher inflation on global trade disruptions. This according to Bank of Canada Governor Tiff Macklem at a speech given to the Canada-UK Chamber of Commerce in London.
It's England's only hope.
Yeah, the governor delivered the speech entitled Global Trade in a Changing World, where he went over how growing tensions with China could add to supply chain risks for Canadian businesses. Meaning, as trade tensions grow, we could see higher prices. And, for some reason, maybe they didn't want to, or were told not to, embarrass themselves abroad, Canadian media held off on the rate cut questions. Except for one, but that came from the United States, bringing the total rate cut questions to 30 for this year.
You clam up. You got it, though.
Instead, the media focused on the governor's speech, asking about how global trade tensions could affect the Canadian economy. So what I want to do today is go over the governor's speech, take a look at the press conference held thereafter where the governor was asked about a potential Trump election and Canada's tariffs on EVs, and then discuss some implications. As we'll see today, while Governor Macklem is projecting further rate cuts going forward, the governor is also warning about potential upside risks to Canada's CPI. We will continue to track Bank of Canada policy as well as Canada's inflation data on this channel. Click like and subscribe if you want to get those updates, but for now, let's get into the speech. Onto the speech. As mentioned, the governor's speech was primarily concerned with the changing trade relationships across the globe. Mainly, our changing trade relationship with China, which is being rewired, recast, and redirected.
Well, I've always been a firm believer in the 3 Rs.
But yeah, rewired, recast, and redirected. The long and short of that is that China will no longer be the supplier of the lowest cost goods, as Russia's invasion of Ukraine reminded the West of the need for supply chain resilience. Meaning, don't position your economy to be almost completely dependent on another country with which you could one day be at war.
You're just figuring that out?
As such, trade policy is being recast, with the West thinking about said policy more in terms of national and economic security, rather than simple economic development, which is showing up in the emergence of import and export tariffs. And we can see this shift in focus towards economic and national security concerns vis-a-vis the West positioning towards China.
These advances have sparked concern that Chinese technology could both displace local industry and compromise national and economic security. The U.S. has banned the use of some Chinese products and restricted the exports of leading technologies to China. Other countries, including Canada and the U.K., have taken similar steps. In May, the United States announced it would quadruple its tariffs on Chinese EVs to 100%. And Canada is following suit.
As such, while globalization, the inclusion of China in the world economy, allowed for lower prices in the 1990s and early 2000s, that may no longer be the case as tensions continue to rise.
The rapid globalization through the 1990s to around the global financial crisis significantly reduced the prices of many globally traded goods. This contributed to a lower cost of living for many households. Going forward, with globalization slowing, the cost of global goods may not decline to the same degree. And all things equal, this could put more upward pressure on inflation.
And I think it's worth briefly noting that this new period of deglobalization, or snowbalization, he's clever when he goes abroad, this new period of deglobalization is definitely nothing new when we look through the annals of history. Back in 2001, Williamson and O'Rourke documented earlier rounds of globalization, which lasted from the late 19th century all the way up until World War I. During that period, there was massive foreign investment in capital flows among countries, major increases in trade, massive increases in migration, free movement of peoples, and substantial increases in the trade of technology. But while the world was becoming much more interconnected throughout that period, we also saw major increases in inequality, especially within wealthier nations, provoking a populist backlash between 1914 and 1945. In fact, Niall Ferguson has documented how we're now starting to regain those heights of inequality that we haven't seen since right before World War I. So, globalization, to a certain extent, acts as a cycle. We see movements toward more interconnectedness, and then subsequent moves away, backlashes against that level of interconnectedness.
Oh, who could have predicted this?
And as such, it does appear to be happening again as we move closer and closer to a multipolar world, and we're seeing that pushback against globalization. And as such, the governor is arguing with this movement away from globalization towards deglobalization, we could very well lose some of the stability, some of the economic advantages, some of the low inflation that came with that previous movement towards a globalizing world order. And speaking of protectionist policies, the governor was asked at the press conference about his thoughts on the potential election of Donald Trump and how that could impact Canada's economy.
Hi there, Paul Waldie from the Globe and Mail. You talked a lot about in your speech about Canada's reliance on the U.S. for trade. Do you worry about somebody like Donald Trump winning the election given the high tariff agenda he's pursuing in this campaign, more so than even when he was president?
Now, just out of curiosity, does the Globe and Mail really expect our central bank governor to give any comment that could be perceived as interfering in the election of our biggest trading partner?
I am important!
And of course, the governor didn't.
Well, you won't be surprised. I'm not gonna comment on politics or any party or any administration.
Well, the media has asked you 29 times about rate cuts this year, knowing full well you were never going to answer any one of them. So maybe, yeah, that could have been a surprise.
Great Britain! We're actually in Great Britain!
Oh no, we'll never get to England now.
Regardless, the governor played it safe, noting that the trade relationship between the US and Canada is beneficial and important for both countries.
Look, the Canada-U.S. trade relationship is very valuable to both our countries. It has, been periodically renegotiated, updated, expanded, and I think continuing that strong relationship is going to be very important for Canada. And yes, anything that were to disturb that, that could have a significant effect on the Canadian economy.
Next, the UK Telegraph chimed in, asking about Canada's protectionist policies vis-a-vis China on EVs.
How do you think the West's approach to Chinese EVs will impact the transition to net zero, given the concerns around the costs of that transition? And do you agree with the West's approach to China, particularly on electric cars?
The governor, predictably, did not criticize Western governments, but did offer some economic implications.
Look, that shift in global order, it does have cost implications. And I think the IMF in particular has done some very good work on the potential costs of trade fragmentation. We'll see what happens. But our job is to control inflation. And so what we're focused on really is, where are those costs? Where are they in the system? What's going to happen to those costs? What impact are they going to have on the economy? What impact are they going to have on inflation? So the changing relationship with China is a big part of that story. And our job really at the Bank of Canada is to understand how that's impacting the economy. It's not our job to set policy.
And yeah, the deglobalization, the decoupling from China, could lead to some very different economic realities than we've seen for the past 30 years, when we continue to increase our reliance on Chinese goods. In the IMF report to which the governor is referring, shows that we are seeing an increase in trade tensions over the past few years, with trade restrictions increasing sharply since 2017, which could, says the IMF, result in a permanent loss to global GDP. And then the governor was asked about some domestic questions as well, including whether or not the bank thinks that we'll see more unemployment, especially following Friday's dismal unemployment report, to which the governor didn't really answer the question, except to say that that's why the Bank of Canada is lowering rates, but there will be a lag effect, which won't work right away.
As inflation gets closer to our target, it's time for, we want to see growth start to pick up. We want to see households spending increase. We want to see business investment increase. We want to see companies hiring, have bigger hiring plans. We want to see job growth pick up. There'll probably be some lag. The labor market often lags a bit, so there's probably, you're probably going to see some further adjustment.
So, short answer, yeah, it does look like the Bank of Canada thinks we'll see a rise in unemployment as this goes on. Finally, for the 30th rate cut question of the year, the Wall Street Journal.
From the Wall Street Journal. Governor, I know that the Bank of Canada has forecast 2.8% growth in the third quarter. Few private sector economists believe that growth is going to even come close to that. They're more believing growth of around 1%. How big a miss on second half growth or even third quarter growth would there have to be to consider a deeper rate cut of a half point?
Which, of course, the governor did not answer, as he's never once, maybe once when the rate cuts were about to start, answered a rate cut question.
Paul, well, you won't be surprised. I'm not going to put a number on that. You got to look at the number. You got to look underneath the number and see, where's the momentum, where's it coming from, how sustainable it is. So I really can't put a number on it.
What the did I say?
So, in summary, while we've been hearing nothing but endless rate cuts from our own Canadian media here at home, with the governor pushing the narrative that inflation is coming down, we have the speech in London where, at least in the medium to longer term, the governor is noting that the inflationary story is not that simple. That over the next few years, as tensions escalate with China, as the West deglobalizes or desnowbalizes, the West may not be able to depend on that downward pressure on prices that have enabled the ultra-low interest rates that we've seen over the past decade or two. And I think this speech adds another dimension to the interest rate story, one that is so rarely talked about. That is the changing geopolitical order. All too often, I think, especially here in Canada, especially with Canadian media, we only focus on what the Bank of Canada is doing. But what I think this speech showed is that there's a whole nother dimension, a whole nother game being played out, a geopolitical game which very much could affect what happens to us here on the ground. With that said, we will continue to track global developments and how they affect us here in Canada on this channel. Click like and subscribe if you want to get those updates, but for now, thanks so much for watching.